here with Dr. Iris Freelander, and in the next few minutes, we'd like to talk to you about attitudes. We all have attitudes about life, about the people around us, about the world in which we live. And the attitudes that we have determine the quality of our thought processes. And in New Thought metaphysical philosophy, we talk so often about mind dynamics and the importance of the way that we think determining the quality of our life. The way you and I think about life, the way you and I think about experience, the way you and I think about those around us determine the quality of our lives. And our attitudes are just so important, aren't they, Iris?
Yes, indeed. And we're being self-serving when we have a positive attitude in life, which we should really maintain. And certainly unpleasant things happen. We all face adversity. But if our attitude is not self-defeating, then that adversity passes ever so much more easily. And attitude is quite well known in the world today. The kids call it the big A. They have that big A. Well, it's well known that our attitude changes the course of our lives.
It changes the course of our lives. It also changes the way people relate to us, doesn't it?
Yeah. And we need to, not that we need to, life is so much more joyous and enjoyable if our attitude is that of being open and accepting and loving toward others and just accepting, which is the opposite of being judgmental, to be totally non-judgmental. And it's actually easy. Again, it's just a mindset, isn't it?
It is. And accepting of change. I think, change is one of the difficulties we all have, and yet it's the one thing that's ever present in our lives, and it's the one thing that we know is going to visit all of us. All of us, our lives are changing, our bodies are changing, our relationships are changing, and our world is changing. And this issue of attitudes in all of those areas, we see them. You see it in your counseling, as do I, and we see it at the church and different places in our lives where people's attitudes about their relationships, about the world, about the changes that are taking place in and around them are either good or positive or they're negative. And so many people have just inbred negative attitudes, and they share those negative attitudes, and then other people become a part of their thinking.
Yes, and our attitude is often determined by how other people are treating us, so we have to just really skip that. I was thinking while you were talking about my little 6-month-old grandson, and his attitude is when it's time for his food, that he wants his food. And so he makes certain motions with his hands and with his face, and he doesn't look very happy. And sometimes it makes me laugh because he looks so funny. So I laugh at him now, and now he knows that his attitude is not going to get his food any faster. So he laughs at himself now. And I think that is quite something that this 6-month-old child knows when we're laughing at him, not with him. And then he has the grace to laugh at himself. So that's a good lesson for adults. And if a 6-month-old knows that, then we all know it instinctively, don't we?
Yeah, we do. We know so many things instinctively, but we work hard to overcome our instincts. And our instincts really are for us to have positive attitudes and to have a positive view of life. And it is through the process of our childhood and adolescence and our environment that we're taught negativity, or we're taught positive attributes. But I think the natural dynamic of our mind is to see the good. And I think an example of that is so often that when we look at the past, when we look at the experiences of the past, when someone passes away, for instance, that we either loved or didn't love, we tend over a period of time to remember the good times and to remember the good. That's the way our minds operate. That's our natural instinct. The good old days. Everybody can talk about the good old days, and it doesn't matter whether the good old days for our elderly people was the 20s and the 30s, and the good old days for middle-aged folks was the 40s and the 50s. And we need to understand that the good old days of tomorrow are right now. And the good old days were never so great. But our minds think of them and recall the good experiences. And that's a natural dynamic of mind, and it's a natural process. And it's a divine process that has been placed in us by the Creator so that we're able to see and hold on to the good things. But some of us have been so damaged through our experiences and through our lives. We've been taught to see the negative aspects. We've been taught to have negative attitudes about life so that we're able to suppress this view of seeing the good. And unfortunately, so many people never are able or are infrequently able to see the good, and that's sad.
Yes, it is sad because they're taking away so much joy from their own lives and also spreading gloom into the lives of others.
Mhm.
And so um, it's really strange that we fall into those habits, isn't it, in the first place?
It is, and I think we fall into it even more universally. Many of us in our individual lives and views, but I think all of us fall into it from time to time in the worldview.
Yeah.
And so we get into this way of deciding that everything's bad, worse than it ever has been, and getting worse all the time. And so that issue, and it has to do with insecurity, it has to do with the way that we view change and we resist change, and it has to do with our conditioning through our lifetime of people trying to convince us that bad things are really going to happen. And of course, bad things do happen, but a lot of good things happen as well.
Exactly.
And when we watch the news or we read the newspaper, so many people become so enthralled or so involved with the negative aspects of life, because of course, certainly in the news, there is a tendency to report the negative aspects. But there are so many wonderful things that happen. And of course, a lot of people say, well, why don't they report the good things? Well, the good things aren't reported because there are so many of them, and yet we overlook them. And in our own lives, there are so many good things that we can see in life. And of course, we're in a period of untold prosperity and great advances in terms of medical science and in terms of understanding and information, and just a whole lot of good things are happening in the world. A lot of things are happening that ought to give us positive attitudes in life, and instead, a lot of us hold on to that negativity.
Yes, and we can also, from a spiritual aspect, know that things are happening in a spiritual way so that more and more vital information is divulged to mankind as a whole. And that's something to be joyous about in itself, isn't it?
Wonderful things. There's so many wonderful things happening on the spiritual side in this world, and a lot of those wonderful things have to do with the changing realities of spiritual
Yes.
life and the kind of understanding that we have now because of the fact that we have so many different faiths that are coming together. And I heard a talk recently on religious and spiritual issues, and the speaker was talking about the importance, from a spiritual standpoint, of deciding what it is we agree upon first, and talking about those things, and not beginning with the things we disagree on, because we begin so often with the things we disagree on. And in a relationship that happens, in a family that happens, in a job it happens, in our spiritual life it happens, in politics it happens, in all of these aspects of decision making in our lives. We so often begin with what I disagree with about you and me, instead of beginning with what we have in common. And what we have in common are so many good and wonderful things.
Yes, and a good thing counselors do with their clients is to give them a piece of paper and they list all the positive things in that relationship and all the negative things. And without fail, they have, if they think enough as a relationship to go for counseling, it means there's hope. And without fail, there's ever so many more positive things than there are negative. And I've seen stories written about that a lot. And we can always remember that in our own lives and in our own for our own needs.
And the world is a friendly place, and I
Yeah.
think that's a hard thought to get across to a lot of people. But this world is a very good place to be, and from a spiritual standpoint, it's the place where we all need to be. And one of the things that we understand in New Thought metaphysical philosophy is we are where we need to be. Every one of us is where we need to be. Every one of us is at this point in history on this planet. Every one of us is in the relationship we're in. Every one of us is in the health condition we're in. Every one of us is in the financial status that we're in, because that's where we need to be. We need to be where we are to learn the lessons that we've come to learn. And the learning of the lessons is what makes life exciting, doesn't it? Or isn't it? And so as we learn those lessons, we're able to embrace change. We're able to deal with changing circumstance. We're able to look at challenge in a positive way. We're able to overcome the negative aspects of life. And all of life is about this wonderful experience of overcoming and being able to deal with circumstances and situations. It's a very empowering feeling, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it's in resisting the negativity that we get our problems. And if we resist, then we're putting a negative connotation onto the event or the person. And so we should, and Jesus said, resist, not evil. And so we can think what is evil but error of thought. So don't resist that error of thought, wherever it's coming from or from whomever it's coming.
And move away from that and look at the
Yeah,
positive aspects of life. And
yeah.
I think, too, it's important for us to talk about the fact that we're not talking about some kind of Pollyanna kind of we're talking about a real change in the way that we think
Hmm.
and the way that we think about life, and being guided and directed to do things differently, to have an attitude that cultivates within us and those around us, especially our children and young people, cultivating within them the real expectation that life is going to offer a myriad of challenges, and all those challenges are opportunities, and all of the losses that we have can be lessons and methods of learning how we can overcome and more effectively live out the life that we've been called and placed here to live.
Exactly. And fear would be the thing we want to avoid, and love. And fear is opposite love. So the more we love, and that doesn't mean personal, intense personal love, but just loving life and loving circumstances and loving the people around us and loving our everything. It just, do we live a life of love or do we live a life of fear? And so as we live a life of fear, then our attitude is wholly different. And so we need to drop those negative aspects from our lives. And just to say we need to is one thing, but we really do need to, just for our own self-preservation.
And you touched upon a wonderful topic, and that in the vein of attitude, which we're talking about, and that's this attitude of fear.
Hmm.
And I think when we have and when we operate from a position of fear, we're in real trouble.
Yeah.
And we need to know that. We need to accept that. If we're fearful of something, if we're afraid,
Hmm.
then we need to be aware of the fact that the dynamic of our mind has brought us to a point where we don't want to be. And we need to get out of that fearful nature and overcome the fear, because the fear, and of course, a simple definition that we use in New Thoughts often is false evidence appearing real, FEAR, false evidence appearing real. Fears are those things which we believe are going to come upon us. They don't have to do with the present moment. They have to do with something that we anticipate. And we know that the dynamic of our mind is such that our thoughts create things. And so the things that we fear, as Job said, that which I feared has come upon me. And we all know people who have feared diseases or feared events in their lives and have talked about those to such an extent that, and surely they came to be. And in many cases, our thoughts create these self-fulfilling prophecies. And so the fears of our lives sometimes become the reality of our life. And we need to understand that if we continue to operate and live in a consciousness of fear, then we're really moving down a road that may very well bring us to the very point that we don't want to be.
Yes, and you know, we hear about those people who fight so hard for a good cause, something they believe in, and then in the end, that's what kills them. And we were both reading an article recently about a Dr. Semmelweis who was fighting to have hospitals have more antiseptic habits. And so, and then he died from having a cut on his hand, and the germs invaded his body through that cut. And that's what he had spent his life fighting. And I don't quite remember now others, but there are others who died of the same disease they had fought all their lives.
And people who are very fearful of getting a disease who in fact get them. And that's not to say that it always happens, but it is to say that the fears of our life can create great difficulties for us and put us in grave danger. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
We would like to give you the opportunity to explore and discover in your own home the new thought teachings that this program is sharing with you by sending you a free copy of one of these booklets. Simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807. Whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can reach it through confident living.
Overcoming fear is really so beneficial to all of us, and I guess of all of the negative attitudes that we have, the fearful attitudes are among the most damaging, aren't they?
Yes, I think fear would be, again, because it's the opposite of love, and love is gives us more peace, joy, beauty, and all good things in our lives. So the opposite then would give us just the opposite. And as long as we know that and work on it, then we have a certain positive results if we do work on it. And we can work through any of those character difficulties that we might have. And working through fear, we would just enlist the aid of love instead of enlisting the aid of fear in whatever we're doing in our lives.
And having a spirit or a feeling of joy in life
Mhm.
is very important, isn't it? I'm thinking about the popular authors that have written, Robert Schuller has written and others have written on the Beatitudes. And one of the things I think that Dr. Schuller talks about is the be happy attitudes. So the attitude of being happy is in and of itself a transforming way of thought, just to be happy and to be joyful. And unfortunately, a lot of us don't have much happiness or joy in our lives, and that's our fault. It's not society's fault. It's not a condition of the world. But one of the things when I talk to people so often, and especially people who are somewhat depressed and have a negative attitude about life, I'll often ask them, what is it that you really enjoy doing? When is it the last time that you were really happy? What is it that really makes you happy and joyful? And so many people have to stop and think about that. Now, if we have to think about what makes us happy, if we have to think about what makes us joyful, and the other question that I ask people sometimes is, when's the last time that you really had a laugh that was a real laugh, that was a real belly laugh? And for so many people, they'll say, well, I never have, or it's been 20 years, or it's been 30 years. And that in and of itself says a lot about the attitudes of that individual. And so just having a happy attitude, having a joyful attitude in view of life can go a long way. And that can allow us to not only laugh in the face of difficulty, and again, not to laugh in a Pollyanna way, but to be able to look life in the face and be able to deal with the circumstances and situations. Some tragic things are going to happen to all of us, and it is our attitudes that are going to allow us to either get through them, to grow through them and go through them, or to be destroyed and devastated by them.
Yes, and it's a choice. It's our own choice. And we all have adversity facing us, and we have to face the death of those we love and sickness of people we love, and within our own bodies too. And we have financial changes in our lives. Everyone has all these things happening. But if we look at it in a doom and gloom way, then it's going to impact on us just in that very fashion. So we can change our environment by our own attitude.
We can, definitely. And I'm thinking now about the prosperity saying. There's a story that I use often at church, and there are places where I talk about the fact that when we have financial challenges, if we have an empty checkbook, that's great joy, and if you have a stack of bills, that's wonderful, because if you have a stack of bills on the table, it means that you have something. Bills mean you have electricity, and you've got clothes on your back, or whatever you've charged or bought, and you've got rent to pay, which means you have a roof over your head, and so if we have bills to pay, it means that we have some goods and we have some wonderful things. The other thing that means is that we have resources, because we obviously had money at one time to put in that bank account. And if we don't have enough money now to cover the expenses of that bank account, then we need to be guided and directed and open to the prosperity and abundance that will bring us to that point. Because there are lots of people that don't have checkbooks and have no bills, but they also have no place to live, and they have no clothes to wear, and they have no cars to drive. So with bills and with the obligations of life come some real joys.
Yeah.
And we ought to be thankful for those bills. We ought to be thankful for those financial challenges, because financial challenges and financial reverses give us the opportunity to overcome that financial adversity, to overcome that poverty and that lack of resources, and to claim the abundance and the prosperity that we once had, or that we know we can have. And those changes come about through attitude. And we can have a poverty mentality, or we can have an abundance mentality. We can have a mentality of sickness, or we can have and disease, or we can have a mentality of health and radiance. And it's important to say that on the health side, or on the prosperity side, on any of these sides, it doesn't have to do with the manifestation coming about as importantly as it has to do with what's going on in our own lives and in our own minds and within our own being. We both have known some people that have been very seriously and gravely ill, and some of them unto death, and have died to this physical life, but they have been in radiant health in the midst of their disease, because they've seen beyond the physical ailment that they had, and they claimed the reality of the radiant health that they had despite the appearance of disease. And I think so often we believe that we need to see the manifestation of the good before we'll be happy about the good. But we need to be able to see the good in the midst of where we are. We need to be able to see our health in the midst of our sickness. We need to be able to see our prosperity in the midst of our limit and our lack. We need to be able to see the mountaintop from the valley of our experience, because it's from the valley that we can see that mountain and see the reality of who and what we are.
Yes, and we have to view the positive potentials, and there are so many potentials in every aspect of life, and there's the negative potential and the positive. So if we accentuate the positive potentials, then we get somewhat of a guidance on where to go from there. And it's, again, if our mindset is that of being totally negative, then that's what we're going to come up with. But if, as you said, we're joyous and looking out for good, then that's what's going to come to us.
Yeah, we look for the good and praise it whether it's here or not. We look at the
Yes.
health and praise it whether it's here or not. We look at the prosperity and praise it whether it's here or not. And so often people will talk to us about, well, tell me how.
Yeah.
You know, so often people want formulas. And of course, we do give techniques, and we do share information in this program and at the church and in our talks with people. But one of the things that is a little unique about what you and I do and about what our church does and about metaphysics and new thought from our perspective is it's not to give the answers.
Yes.
It's to pose the questions,
Yes.
and to encourage people to seek their own answer and to find their own way. And the ways are many. And I think a lot of times we've come to believe that somebody's going to give us the answer. They're going to tell us the way to go. And there are so many ways to go in life. There's so many ways to have the attitudes that we need, to have the life that we need. But we each need to find those in our own way. And so we're not here to tell you, do this and this and this. We're here to say, this is where we want to be. This is where we want you to be, but find your own way.
Yeah.
And we're willing to help you in the process. And that's what this program's about. And that's what the things that we do in life are about, you and I and at our church center. But we're not telling people how to do it or how to live. We're telling them that there is a way to live, and that there is a magnificent way to live, but they need to find it themselves. And they do it by questioning and by introspection and by looking and examining their own life and their own being and deciding whether it's the way they want it to be. And if it's not, then it's up to them to change. And we can't change for other people. We can show the way,
Yes.
but the way that gets shown or the direction has to be chosen by the individual.
Yes, and by one way or another, they have to have an upbeat outlook on life, and also when they pray, to not pray desperately, but to pray with joyousness and to thank God for what they want. So it makes a big difference in people's lives if they pray a prayer of gratitude instead of supplication, and it always makes a difference. And that's really obvious, isn't it, in life?
Absolutely. And, you know, the issue, we could probably do a program on prayer sometime. We talk a lot about meditation, but so many of us, and of course, we're not ever trying to malign any kind of faith, and we're not trying to tell anybody not to believe or to change their faith tradition. But prayers of where we're appealing, where we're begging God to do something. The fact is that God knows our need before we speak it. So we don't have to tell God what our need is. And if it helps us to do that, we can do that. But it's important for us to center ourselves in prayer in the truth. And when we center ourselves in the truth, we center ourselves in the gratitude of having our needs met, having our guidance given, having the will of God, which doesn't change. You know, it's the will of God is the same for us always. It is that we have good and only good, that we're healthy and prosperous and happy and joyful. And so it isn't that we need to convince God of anything. And so often in our prayers we do that. We're pleading with God to change God's mind. We're pleading with God to give us something, when in fact God knows what we need even before we speak it. And it is our obligation to center ourselves in prayer so that we are able and willing and open to receive that which is already ours, so that our thinking is right, and so that we align ourselves with the presence of the power of God. And centering is a big part of that.
Yes, indeed. And if we could impress any thought on our listeners, it would be to pray prayers of thanksgiving, and to know that when they're desperately praying, they're accentuating the negative part of their lives. So to not accentuate the negative, because thoughts are things and thoughts create. And we are co-creators with Creator God. God gave us free will, so we can freely create or we can freely tear down. But as we pray in a positive way and prayers of thanksgiving, then we are building.
Absolutely. And this prayer of thanksgiving is just tremendously important. And I would encourage people who are used to praying on their knees begging to change their begging into prayers of thanksgiving. And we can give thanks for just everything. And we can give thanks for the experience. And we can give thanks for the negative aspects of our lives. And we can give thanks for the fact that we're going to be guided and directed in the way that we need to go. We can give thanks for the fact that God already knows what we need, and not spend all of this time trying to convince God of something or to tell him something as though God isn't aware of what's going on in our life. God is intimately aware of what's going on in your life and my life and all of our lives. And so this issue of praying in a spirit of thanksgiving and praying in a spirit of unity with the presence and the power of God and praying in the spirit of joy and happiness despite the appearance that we have, and praying for an understanding and a realization of who and what we are as perfect children of God changes the whole atmosphere of prayer. And you're absolutely right. The negative aspects of prayer bring about negative manifestations.
Yes, and we need to always remember that. And it makes, I'd just like our listeners to try that. Just try it for a day or a week and see the difference in their attitude. Their attitude will totally change because they will become positive. Because instead of accentuating, as you said, the negative, then they are accentuating the positive, whatever it is, whatever part of life that is. And we know the laws, and we know that that's the way, that's how we manifest.
And we know that in that trite saying of New Thought, that thoughts in mind create after their kind. So whatever we're creating with our thinking, whatever we're creating with our prayers, we are creating and manifesting in our lives, and we need to be very cautious and very aware of the fact that we are creating, and we are, as you said so beautifully a few minutes ago, co-creators with God in our lives, and that God wants to create and manifest in our lives good and great and wonderful and magnificent things. And the one thing that God wants to create in your life and manifest in your life and mine is an attitude of gratitude and an attitude that is positive and supportive of all that you need in your life. And so we hope that the information we've shared with you has been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.